Hello again, my fellow Jeti users, and welcome back to my workshop for another of Harry's Jeti Clinic videos. And in this one, I'm going to deal with a request I had through Facebook Messenger from Mario. And he asks if I can help a friend of his who is fairly new to Jeti and flies competition aerobatics. But due to problems with his fingers operating some of the switches, wonders can he have automatic rates for snap rolls and automatic rates for spins depending on the throttle position, so that when he pulls full aileron and full rudder, then if the throttle's at idle, it would go into spin rates, and if the throttle's above 10%, it would go to snap roll rates. The good news, of course, is that yes, we can do all that. And so that's what this video is going to address. The sequence of events would be that we set up a logic switch first of all, which will detect when both full aileron and full rudder are applied in either direction for each. And then combine that with firstly throttle at idle to create a new logic switch, and secondly combine it with the throttle at a higher rate to create the snap roll switch. We would then use those two switches to switch flight modes. So there'd be a snap roll flight mode and a spin flight mode. And the reason we don't go straight to just manipulating the rate switch is that we'll be using two different switches here. The snap roll switch and the spin switch. If you were just using one switch, so one overall snap and spin rate, you could go straight to the rate switches. So having created the two flight modes, we'll then go to the rate switches, change them to be specific to the flight modes, and we can set up everything there. And that also, of course, gives you the option to set dual or triple rates or proportional rates within those modes themselves, including your normal flight mode. So you can have your spin rate, your snap roll rate, and then in your normal flight mode you can still have dual rates, triple rates, proportional rates, completely separate, whatever. So let's look at the work sequence. And although I've told you that it's going to be logic switches and then flight modes, what we're actually going to do is set up the rates first through the flight modes, and I'll explain the reason why. So if we go into our fine-tuning and our flight modes, you can see I've already set up our two flight modes, the snap and spin mode. You can have other modes for your landings and takeoffs and defaults, whatever you want, but I would keep these ones near the top so that whenever you switch them on, they override, unless you wanted something like your landing mode to override any possibility. And what I'm going to do now here, rather than assign the logic switches that we are going to make, is I'm going to assign a three-position switch to it to make it easy to set up the rates. And the reason being is that once we assign the logic switches here, you're going to have to hold the full aileron and full rudder on in order to get it into that flight mode, and then try and operate the rate screen and get all your settings there whilst holding both sticks hard over. So it's just easier to do it on a switch first of all and then go off and we'll set up the logic switches. So switch at middle, say, oops, I don't want the name. So my snap, I'll say snap switch up, and spin, I'll say snap switch down. Really doesn't matter as long as we've got a way of switching between default mode, as you can see here, snap mode and spin mode. So we do that, go to our dual rate expo, and it depends which ones you want to have snap and spin rates on. Let's pick all three of ailerons, elevator and rudder to show it can be done. So what we need to do is go into it and now press the programming dial again to change it to the flight mode separate positions. So we're in default flight mode, so anything we do here will apply only in the default flight mode. So let's come down, and I'm going to make an assumption here that your snap and spin rates are going to be higher than your normal flight mode. So what I'm going to do is turn the normal flight mode down to 50%. And I'm just going to use figures that make it easy for us to see at the end and prove what we've actually done. Obviously, you'll choose figures that are relevant to your model. So there we are. In default flight mode, you've got a rate of 50%. Let's say snap has a rate of, we'll go for 80%. And now I'll move the switch to the spin mode. So we'll leave spin at 100, normal flight mode 50, and snap at 80. Okay, so what was that? Snap at 80, yeah. Say OK to that one, and we'll just come down, and I'll go through the same thing with the elevator. Press the programming dial, change it to separate, come down to your rate. Default rate we said was going to be 50. Snap rate would be 80, and we'll leave the spin rate at 100. OK to that. And I'll just do the same for rudder again. Change it from G to S by pressing the programming dial. Come down to rate. We're in default, so we'll take that down to 50. I'll just leave it open. In case you're very new to Jeti and you're wondering why did that times 10 appear, I press the menu button, times 10, and then every click of the dial gives 10% instead of 1%. So I'll move it to snap mode, which was 80, default 50, and we're leaving it 100 for spin mode. Okay, there we are. That's that done. So now we'll go to create our logic switches. Logic switch 1 is going to be the one that detects when we've got full aileron and full rudder. And we can do it all in one logic switch, even though we've got 4 possible combinations, because you have left aileron, left rudder, or left aileron, right rudder. Not that you would, but you never know what you do. But we've certainly got them running in both directions. So control 1, press the button. I'm going to move the aileron stick. I don't want the switched version, I want proportional. I don't want that one, so I'm going to press proportional again. I'm talking nonsense. I do want that one because we're not going to switch it in this screen. Say OK to that. Now come along to this field and start choosing here. That means if the value is in between the percentage, and that one means the value is greater than the percentage in either direction. So if we choose that, the X is outside, go to, we'll say 90% aileron. And now, if I go more than 90% left or right, that will switch on. So watch that. I'll go left, switches on. I'll go right, switches on at the end. Lovely. So that's taken care of the aileron in both directions. I'll just do the same for rudder now. I'll move the rudder stick, press proportional. I want this screen, yeah, not that one, not that one. You want that one. Say OK. Again, change it to X is outside. Yeah. Come on here, go 90%. And finally we come down and the condition will be and. So both of them have to go beyond 90% in either direction, and that will switch on. So I'll go full right, aileron, full right rudder, and it switches on. Full left aileron, full left rudder, and it switches on. Of course, if I've got full left aileron and full right rudder, it switches on. Similarly, full right aileron, full left rudder switches on, but I think that's not going to be a problem. You're very unlikely to be doing that, although you might do if you're trying some inverted spinning. So whatever combination you have of full aileron, full rudder, it'll pick it up. And you can move that out to closer to 100% if you want, but bear in mind, if you choose a value like 98, 99%, if your sticks aren't perfectly calibrated and you don't push the sticks hard enough, you won't quite trigger it. So give yourself a little bit of latitude in those. Say OK to that. Right, logic switch 2 will be control 1, we press plus, and it's logic switch 1. Say OK. So whenever we move both sticks to full extent, that comes on. Control 2 will go for the snap mode first of all. So we move the throttle stick, and now again we press prop for proportional. We don't want that one, we do want this one. Now put the throttle up some value from idle where you want it to allow the snap roll mode to come in. And Mario said 10%, so I'm going to put it about there. You can, if you want, press this button, and that will make the switch on point there. Or at any time, you simply rotate the programming dial and it will manipulate those numbers for you. So I'll stick it at -70. I mean, Mario said about 10% open. It depends on your point of view. 10% between idle and mid-throttle would be -90, or 10% of total travel. So idle to full power would of course be -80. And with the throttle forward of that point, it switches on. With the throttle back from that point, it switches off. We say OK, and the condition will be and. So with the throttle below that -80% point, the P4 is off. So it doesn't matter if I pull full aileron and rudder, the output stays off. It's not going to switch on. But if I move the throttle up far enough, then that will switch on. Say OK. And down to logic switch 3. Come down again. Control 1 is logic switch number 1. That's the aileron and rudder trigger. Control 2 this time is going to be, oh, silly me, move the throttle stick, press prop till you get there, and now we want it only to work when the throttle is at idle. So we do that, press this button, and it would trigger at -100. Again, because of slight errors in your calibration or whatever, or maybe you're pulling the stick very hard back when you did the calibration and you don't pull it hard back when you're flying, I'd suggest your switch on would want to be something like that, so that there's no problem with it getting back in there. See, even there we can't get it. There we go. So get some value that differentiates between the two just when you get the throttle all the way back. Now what we're going to have to do now is press the reverse button, rev, because you see this is throttle open switches it on and throttle at idle switches off, but we want throttle idle to switch on, so you press rev, there we go. And the condition once again will be and. So with throttle at idle, if we pull the full sticks, it switches on either way. But with the throttle open a bit, then full stick, oops, I moved the throttle there. If throttle virtually all the way open, it's off, but get the throttle back to idle and it comes on. Say OK to that. So these are the two switches, 2 and 3, snap and spin modes we'll use. So now we can go back to fine-tuning flight modes and change these to those logic switches instead of the physical switch we used. Clear it out, plus logical switch, logic switch 2. I didn't give them a name, which makes life easier. I just don't give them a name to save time in doing these demonstrations, but if you'd given them a name when we created the logic switches, you would see it there. It makes life a bit easier. Okay, and the spin mode was logic switch 3. So we clear that, press plus, logic switch 3. Okay, there we go. Now let's come down and have a look at what happens to the dual rates. So there we are. The dual rates are 50% because we're in the default mode. I'm going to put the throttle at half position. I'll move the sticks to their full left aileron and rudder, which should then put it into the snap mode rate, which was, if I remember rightly, 80%. There we go. and full right 80%. Right aileron, left rudder, and left aileron, right rudder. Lovely. Now I'll pull the throttle back to idle. I'll move the sticks to their full extent, and it should go into the spin mode, which should take us to 100%. And there we go, in all 4 possible combinations. And now with the throttle just a little bit open, so that it's between idle and the minus 80% that was used for the snap mode rate, then moving the sticks to the full extent should not trigger them, so it should stay in default mode, and that should stay where it is. And there we are. I'm doing full left, full right, nothing. So if I open up the throttle a little bit, it jumps to snap. Come back on the throttle a little bit, it stays in default. I'm going to come back on the throttle, back on the throttle, back on until we hit the spin rate. So there you go. That is how to get those all done. And if you want to have rates, dual or triple rates, while you're in your normal flight mode, you can just go into, for instance, your ailerons. In your normal flight mode, come down here, assign a switch, that one, and so you've still got your 2 rates available. Just change them to whatever you want in your default flight mode without it affecting the other flight modes. Watch, when I move it to spin or snap mode, the switch will disappear. So we only created it in the default mode, so it will only work there. So that's how you can do it, folks. Have fun with that.